What if a 64-year-old overweight woman sits on your child for several minutes, causing her death? What if, one night, in the comfort of your own home, a simple act of discipline spirals into something unimaginable? What if, in a matter of minutes, a routine punishment turns into a moment of sheer terror, one that can never be undone? And what if, by the time you realize the gravity of what's happening, it's already too late? This is not just a tragic story. It's a chilling reality that unfolded in the quiet suburbs of Pensacola, Florida. A home, a family, a child, 9-year-old Derica Lindsay, who had no idea that this would be her final night alive. She wasn't in a dangerous alleyway. She wasn't lost in an unfamiliar place. She was inside her own home, where she should have been safe. But on this night, safety was an illusion. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The house was still. No alarms, no warning signs. Just another evening, like so many before it. But behind those walls, something unthinkable was about to happen. A decision was made, one that would set off a chain of events so disturbing that even hardened investigators struggled to comprehend it. By the time first responders arrived, the damage was done. Officers stepped into a scene they would never forget. Paramedics worked against time, their movements swift but grim. The air inside that house was thick with something unspeakable. And in the center of it all, Derica, a child whose life should have been just beginning, now gone under circumstances that defy all reason. What really happened inside that house? Who was responsible? And how did something so preventable turn into something so final? To understand the horror of what took place that night, we need to go back to the events that led up to it, to the people involved, and to the moment when everything crossed the line. Welcome to True Untold Stories. Here, we uncover the most gripping, shocking, and mysterious true stories that the world needs to hear. If you are new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Derica Lindsay was just 9 years old, full of life, full of energy, and completely unaware that the very people responsible for her care would become the architects of her final moments. She lived in Pensacola, Florida, with her adoptive parents, Grace Jones Smith and James Edmund Smith. To those outside the walls of their home, they appeared to be a normal family. Neighbors would see Derica playing, her bright smile lighting up the street, her laughter carried by the breeze. But what no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was that behind closed doors, a darkness lurked. The Smith household was not what it seemed. Beneath the surface of their everyday lives, behind the polite exchanges and the outward appearance of normalcy, there were secrets. Secrets that would soon come crashing into the light in the most horrific way possible. For Derica, childhood should have been a time of safety and warmth. But inside that house, discipline didn't mean guidance. It meant something else entirely. And the people who should have been her protectors, they were anything but. But what was really going on inside the Smith home? What led to the events of that fateful night? And how did no one see the warning signs until it was far too late? The truth about what happened behind those doors would soon be revealed, and once it was, there would be no going back. October 14th, 2017. The day everything changed. That night, inside the Smith household, a decision was made. A decision that would transform what should have been a normal evening into something far more sinister. Derica Lindsay, just 9 years old, had been accused of being unruly. A child, laughing, playing, living, now seen as a problem that needed to be corrected. But instead of handling the situation themselves, Derica's adoptive parents, Grace and James Smith, made a call, not to a counselor, not to a teacher, not to anyone who could help in a way that made sense. No, they reached out to someone else, someone who should never have been involved. That person was Veronica Green Posey, a 64-year-old woman, towering in both presence and weight, a figure of overwhelming authority in the eyes of a child. Weighing approximately 325 pounds, Posey did not arrive to comfort, to teach, or to guide. She came for one purpose only: discipline. What happened next inside that house would leave a permanent scar on everyone who heard about it. Because once Posey stepped inside, once she took control, the night would take a turn that no one, not even those responsible, could undo. But what exactly did she do? How far did this discipline go? And how did a single night of punishment turn into something that would shake an entire community to its core? The truth was about to be revealed, and once it was, there would be no way to justify what had been done. The moment Veronica Green Posey stepped into the Smith household, the night took a devastating turn. She wasn't there to talk. She wasn't there to reason. She was there for one thing only: to make Derica obey. Her methods were brutal. First, the ruler, a sharp snap against the skin, then another and another. But Derica was just a child, small, fragile, and terrified. The pain was overwhelming, but the punishment wasn't over. Next came the metal pipe, cold, unforgiving. Each strike landing with force, each blow meant to break, not just her body, but her spirit. But when that wasn't enough, when Derica, in her desperation, still fought to endure, Posey escalated in a way that defies all logic, all humanity. She ordered the 9-year-old to lie face down on an armchair, and then she sat on her. Not for a second, not for a moment of correction, but for over 5 minutes. Imagine the sheer weight. 325 pounds crushing a child's tiny frame. Imagine the panic, the helplessness. Derica gasped, begged, pleaded. "I can't breathe," she cried, again and again. Her voice growing weaker, her body struggling under the unbearable pressure. But Posey didn't move. The room must have been silent, except for Derica's fading cries, except for the sound of air running out. By the time Posey finally stood up, it was already too late. The damage had been done. But what happened next? How did the people in that house react to what they had just witnessed? And when the truth came to light, how did Posey justify what she had done? The nightmare wasn't over yet. In fact, it was only the beginning. The desperate cries that had once filled the room were gone. No more struggling, no more gasping. Just Derica's silence as she slowly lost consciousness under Posey's weight. It was in that moment, only then, that Veronica Green Posey realized something was wrong. The child beneath her wasn't moving, wasn't responding. Derica was unconscious. Panic set in. The weight of what had just happened, what she had just done, hit Posey like a tidal wave. This wasn't discipline anymore. This was something else entirely. Rushed, frantic attempts at CPR followed, pressing down on the tiny, fragile chest she had just crushed, calling out Derica's name as if willing her back to life. But the damage had already been done. At some point, 911 was dialed. The call that should have been made minutes, hours before, was finally placed. Paramedics arrived quickly, but the scene that awaited them was grim. A child, lifeless, small and unmoving in the middle of that house. They worked fast, checking vitals, attempting resuscitation, trying to undo what could no longer be undone. But Derica was gone. At the hospital, it became official. A 9-year-old girl was pronounced dead. The cause? Mechanical asphyxiation. The weight, 325 pounds of pressure, had been too much. Her body simply couldn't fight anymore. The realization settled like a heavy fog over the room. A punishment meant to teach a lesson had stolen a life instead. And now there was no hiding from the truth. But what happened next? How did Posey and the Smiths react once they were faced with the reality of what they had done? And when investigators started asking questions, what explanations could possibly be given for something so unthinkable? The truth was finally coming to light. In the days following Derica Lindsay's tragic death, investigators began peeling back the layers of what really went on inside the Smith household. What they uncovered was more than just a single night of horrific punishment. It was a pattern, a history of abuse disguised as discipline. Neighbors had seen glimpses of it, small signs that, in hindsight, seemed obvious. But no one had ever imagined the full extent of what Derica had endured behind those closed doors. She wasn't just a victim that night. She had been suffering long before it, and now it was time for justice. The first to fall was Veronica Green Posey. The woman who had crushed the life out of a 9-year-old child now found herself in handcuffs, charged with first-degree felony murder and cruelty toward a child. There was no excuse that could save her, no justification that could erase what she had done. The court saw her for what she was, a monster in plain sight. And in the end, the only place left for her was a prison cell. Life in prison. That was her sentence. No parole, no second chances. Just the cold reality that she would spend the rest of her days behind bars, exactly where she belonged. But she wasn't the only one responsible. James Smith, the man who stood by, the man who let it happen, was next. He pleaded no contest, acknowledging his role in the abuse, in the decisions that led to his adoptive daughter's death. His punishment? A 10-year prison sentence. A decade behind bars for the years of suffering Derica endured. Was it enough? Many would say no. And then there was Grace Smith, the woman who had promised to care for Derica. The woman who, instead, allowed her to be brutalized in the very home where she should have been safe. Her fate, however, was still uncertain. A trial was supposed to decide her punishment, but before she could face justice, she was hospitalized. Was it a coincidence? A delay tactic? A real medical emergency? No one could say for sure, but one thing was clear. Derica Lindsay never got a second chance, and the world was watching, waiting, to see if Grace Smith would ever truly face the consequences of what she had allowed to happen. The case was closed, but the scars it left behind would never fade. But here's the real question. How many other children are suffering right now, just like Derica did? And how many more will it take before something truly changes? A child is gone, not by accident, not by illness, but by the very people who were supposed to protect her. But Derica Lindsay's story is not just a tragic story. It is a warning. Her death was not an isolated incident. It was the result of a deeply flawed mentality, one that justifies violence as discipline, that allows abuse to hide under the guise of teaching a lesson. And she is not the only one. Discipline should never mean destruction. Yet, time and time again, society looks the other way. Until it's too late. Until another child's name becomes a headline. Until another life is reduced to a cautionary tale. But here's the harsh reality. Awareness is not enough. Sympathy is not enough. Justice, when it comes too late, is not enough. Real change begins long before tragedy strikes. It begins with asking difficult questions. It begins with refusing to normalize violence against children. It begins with standing up, speaking out, and recognizing that protecting a child's life matters far more than preserving an outdated idea of discipline. Derica didn't have a choice, but we do. So the real question is, how many more children must suffer before we decide that enough is enough? If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts on how communities can better protect children from abuse. Your engagement helps raise awareness, helps people stay alerted, and prevents some future tragedies. Thanks.